So I'm just leaving Cumbers Pass now, passing the railroad line on top, and spent today with Jennifer on a day hike down in the valley near Chama, and now it's 4 in the afternoon and I'm heading out back on the CDT. I'm super excited to get Colorado started, and the good thing about that extended break in Chama was that now there's a whole bunch of people ahead of me who report back on the conditions, and so that really helped me both prepare my route, potential alternatives, as well as all the gear that I needed to take. Definitely took an ice axe, definitely took micro spikes, as conditions up here in parts are still very much winter. No surprise there, we're heading up to elevations of 13,000 feet. It's the end of May, so that is to be expected, even though the Colorado snowpack is very, very, very low this year. Low doesn't mean no snowpack. So Cumbers Pass is at almost exactly 10,000 feet. And as I said, this next section to Wolf Creek's Pass, where you can hitch into Pagosa Springs, it's gonna take me all the way up to, I think the high point is just close of 13,000 feet. And people ahead of me reported that it's doable. Conditions are nice, but there's a couple of quite steep traverses, especially on northern and eastern exposures, that still have significant snow left. Now again, this information is a couple of days old, as I spent a quadruple zero in Chama. The good thing is I'm really well rested, well fed. The interesting thing is that little experiment: how much of a rest do you need for everything to stop hurting? Apparently the answer is 4 days is not enough. So I still feel parts of my legs and knees that are sore and stiff. So it's probably going to be a good week for everything to fully recover. It should be about 3.5 to 4 days to Wolf Creek Pass, depending on conditions and weather. Weather forecast looks promising. Mostly good weather, with the exception of Friday. So today's Wednesday. Friday there might be some precipitation. Good thing on this part is there's water everywhere. The next 3 sections, so from Cumbers Pass to Wolf Creek Pass, from Wolf Creek Pass to Spring Creek Pass, and from Spring Creek Pass to Monarch Pass, essentially the entire western loop around the southern San Juan, are from a no-bow perspective objectively the most challenging part of this hike. There's a number of factors that change from the hiking in New Mexico. The first one being the altitude. Now, altitude has a lot of facets, one of them being less oxygen, so everything's a little more exhausting. You need to get acclimatized. Temperatures are lower, nighttime temperatures are lower. You're very often walking up on ridges. That means weather exposure, that means storm. Temperatures are lower, that means there's still going to be snow, especially on the eastern and northern slopes where the sun has less time to melt it. With snow come a whole set of challenges. One being just the immediate danger that is early summer snow crossings on steep slopes. So if you slip, you slide, you need to self-arrest very quickly, because some of these slopes are 40 degrees and above, and on these kind of slopes, if you start sliding on frozen snow, there's almost no stopping you. There's hardly any friction and you go down the mountain very quickly. Second aspect are avalanches, particularly wet avalanches that can happen if you have an unstable snowpack in the early summer that potentially gets rained into or receives additional pressure from other sources, like people walking over it. And if the snowpack isn't sufficiently attached to the ground, it's possible that even extremely wet spring snow starts sliding on very steep slopes. Now the third and fourth aspect are water is less of an issue because there's a lot of snowmelt going on. What is, however, an issue is navigation, especially in the higher elevations where this trail is still covered in snow. It isn't always clear where the trail actually is because you can't see it. There's no markers, there's no cairns, and you can't see the trail as it's covered in snow. So the only indication that you have are the contours of the mountains that you're walking on, and potentially steps and trails left by people who walk before you, and of course GPS. Fourth aspect is because it's very, very, very early in the season, almost nobody has gone through this section of the San Juans. The only people going through here are really CDT hikers. So, like I said, I'm in the advantageous position that there's, to estimate, probably 30 or 40 people who walked through here before me. But then again, I don't know which routes they took, if they stayed on the trails, if they glissaded down into the valleys to go to the snow-free areas. So it's a bit unclear. We do have some information and some pictures and some reports from those people that helps. But as nobody else has gone through here, also nothing is cleared up. So you have all the winter blowdowns, trees cover just across the trail. So it's a lot of climbing and crawling just to actually walk on the normal trail. Fifth part is logistical planning, because the conditions aren't entirely clear. It's also not entirely clear how much daily mileage I will be able to achieve. And that's of course an important information, because that tells me how much food I need to pack. Now for this upcoming section, it's not that big of a deal, because it's probably going to be around 3.5 to 4 days. So even if it's 5 in the worst case, I would probably manage. I could stretch that food. But the next section, for example, could be anything from 5 to 10 days, depending on conditions. I've heard reports of people in previous years who needed up until 9 days for that section, and even people who had to bail out because moving was so slow that they were just running out of food and couldn't finish all the way to Spring Creek. Now you see, there's a whole bunch of challenges ahead, and there's a couple of things that you can do to mitigate these challenges. One is bring proper equipment. That means be prepared for high alpine environments, waterproof clothing, layering, warm clothing, ice axe, spikes, everything you would need for early summer high alpine endeavors. Now the second thing is stay ahead of the weather. It's not unheard of. On the contrary, it's actually quite likely that at this time of the year, any kind of storm that's moving through would be a snowstorm up here. So you don't want to end up in whiteout conditions, which makes navigation in the mountains extremely challenging. Now number 3 is be prepared and bring all the information that you can and need. That means relevant mapping information. That means slope angles. That means up-to-date weather information and snow information, as well as ideally asking people who are familiar with the terrain. Now, I talked to people who have done it in previous years. I've also talked to people who have done it this year, so who are ahead of me. And I've also talked to the outfitters in Charmer who live in this region and are familiar with the terrain ahead. So I think I have a pretty good conception of what I'm getting myself into. Now, number 4 is plan contingencies. So it's really important to be aware of what are the major choke points, what are the objective hazards at those choke points, and just practice good decision making. If you feel comfortable with the conditions and you think you can make it, then by all means go ahead. If conditions aren't right, there's too many risks associated, have a backup plan. Don't end up standing on a slope thinking, I really don't feel comfortable crossing this, but I have to because I have no alternative. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not supposed to be fear-mongering by any means, but the upcoming sections are challenging, and it's important to be aware of that and to take necessary precautions. The upcoming sections are also among the most beautiful and spectacular of the entire CDT. So that is why I'm really looking forward to them, even though they're probably going to be hard at stretches. I'm excited.